Am I gonna see these guys on this screen here? The FBI guys when we can bring them in 5 minutes. Just tell me when you're ready.
They'll bring him back, and then suddenly cold. And then I think successive changes in government. That was during the pandemic, so it was very difficult to deal with this issue anyway. But certainly, I think when with Anwar's present government, it hasn't been a priority.
Right, that sounds right to me. And back when the top cop was saying that, he was saying that they had information that Jho Low had been in Macau, I remember,
That's right. Yep.
and various other places in China. So yeah, and like I said, we'll be discussing later about exactly where he is. And one of the things we'll be getting into is why that protection exists. Because I think for a lot of ordinary Malaysians and people around the world who followed this scandal is, why the hell is someone who's stolen billions of dollars allowed to continue to reside somewhere and not be arrested and live fairly freely? And you know, our book, we use the quote from Bob Dylan at the front, and it's like, steal a little and they throw you in jail, steal a lot and they make you king. And that's part of the, you know, Jho Low stole enough to be very useful to certain people. I just want to finish by talking a little bit about something that you said in you have a very popular podcast in Malaysia discussing politics. And I think late last year you said that one of your regrets was when you were a minister and had been challenging Najib a little bit about 1MDB, that you didn't push harder. Can you explain a little bit about what it was like back at that time? And you know, obviously the wool was pulled over your and many other leaders' eyes by Najib. You know, he was protecting Jho Low at that time, asking for his name to be taken out of auditor reports into 1MDB and this kind of thing. And you were sort of pushing back on that. Can you just explain a little bit about that dynamic back then? I think that would be interesting to people.
I think, to be fair to Najib, circa 2015, when the Edge started reporting and we had some inkling about the money being siphoned off, he was quite open in cabinet meetings to being questioned, and he would try his best to answer, or if not, he would ask for the then second finance minister, who was read in on some of the stuff that was happening with 1MDB, to explain. I remember there was one time where it was quite a heated cabinet meeting, and Najib asked the then second finance minister to host a dinner for ministers who cared about this issue. Not everyone did, at a hotel in Kuala Lumpur, and to basically give us the full briefing of what he knew or what he attempted to present to us. And at that time, and now in hindsight, we realized that there was a script that was given to him by Jho, obviously, showing how the money was siphoned off to Petro Saudi, Brazen Sky, and all of that. But notwithstanding that, there was an attempt by Najib to try to explain. I remember I went to see him subsequently, I think maybe in 2016. I went to see him privately at his office in Parliament, and I said, look, this thing is not going away, and if what I assume is true, then at least can we, I use the term, can we throw Jho Low under the bus, and can we ask him to take responsibility for the monies that purportedly has been siphoned off and stolen. And then I noticed a slight shift in tone from Najib, a little bit more impatient and a bit more dismissive, saying that, you know, Jho Low is a legitimate businessman, you know, the deals are legitimate. And then I asked him about some of the investments, some specific investments that are taking place, especially one involving monies from Malaysian Civil Service Pension Fund. You know, there was a mine in Mongolia or somewhere, and he got someone to come and brief me the next day. He called this person who was the person in charge of these investments. This guy came and briefed me and showed me some photos of maps and things like that, saying, you know, the SRC is actually investing in a mine in Mongolia. So I kept on pushing, and but I, you know, to be fair, to Najib, he was still engaging with me. He was still engaging with me. He was still at least, getting someone to come and explain these are investments, this mine exists, etc. But I think I was in probably 2016, 2017, after the sacking of Mahyudin and Shafi. I remember again there was a cabinet meeting where he was very curt. Again, I mean there were a couple of us, myself included, who kept on pushing, even though the our colleagues had been sacked. We weren't satisfied with what was happening. But there was a curt response saying that look, anything to do with one MDB now will be handled by me and MOF directly, and there's no more discussion in cabinet.
And we should say that the questions were bubbling up in a big way at that point because the Department of Justice had filed its civil lawsuit saying that these billions had been stolen. And I think you were at the time saying, well, look, we can't just. UMNO was burying its head in the sand, and you were saying a lot of members of UMNO were, but you were saying, look, this is not happening because the Department of Justice just has it in for Malaysia. This is a real scandal, and questioning him. And that's when you notice an impatience in Najib because he's realizing that he can't control this anymore.
Yeah, I think initially, again, I don't want to assume what he knew, what he didn't know, what Jho kept from him, but I assume the openness when we were pushing back initially suggests that he didn't know the true extent of what Jho was planning or what Jho had done. I think he became a lot more dismissive and curt and tried to shut down the internal dissent when probably he realized what had taken place. And it was something that we just couldn't get out of.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. Well, thank you so much for giving us your inside the room perspective on all of that. I think, and I do agree that the scandal is fascinating, and two things can be true at the same time, which are Najib was very corrupt and he stole money from the country for his own gratifications and that of his wife, and he definitely didn't know that billions and billions and billions were being stolen by Jho Low and used to do things like make films and buy businesses in the US and all of that stuff. So without Jho Low getting back, totally agree. This is why we've launched this long multi-hour live event, because without him coming back, there's no end to this story for Malaysia.
And I think just my last word on this is I do hope that Malaysians will follow your episode. I do think that it's dropped off the radar somewhat. That's unfortunate. It's unfortunate because the full measure of justice has not been served in this 1MDB scandal, and it can only be done so when Jho Low is extradited back to Malaysia, charged in Malaysia, convicted in Malaysia after the legal process, of course. And of course, to be fair to Najib, I understand what you said about two things being true. But to be fair to Najib also, we need to get the Jho back to understand the full picture of Najib's involvement. I think that's also important. I mean, it may confirm what certain people think, or it may change the way people think about what actually took place. Of course, he has to be responsible for what's taken place, but I think the justice is incomplete until we have Jho.
100%. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Kyrie, and I look forward to continuing to search for the truth here and interacting with you in the future, and also perhaps I can come on your podcast if I can muster my Malay. Anyway, thanks for coming on.
Thanks.
Well, that was a fascinating interview with Tom and Kyrie Jamaludin. I have to say, just listening to it, I really reflect on just how confusing the 1MDB scandal is for most people. Not because most people aren't smart, it's because the very point of this whole thing was to make it very complicated. So complicated that you can't easily just understand it. If you try to use the jargon, you will struggle to follow along. But at the same time, despite its complexity, it's very clear that something obviously wrong happened here. Money was stolen, it was laundered around the world, and it has not been returned. And that seems to be a key theme. I think that one thing I would say as well is there's a kind of ongoing misunderstanding about 1MDB, and it's because politics does intervene in the story to some extent. So I really appreciated what Harry said about the Najib nuance, because Najib, I don't believe, and I never believed, was the architect of this fraud. He was initially a conspirator, but of a fraud that he thought was smaller than what was actually being perpetrated. And he was obviously looking at it as a political slush fund and everything like that. But what happened was Jho Low kind of made it look like it was Najib's problem, and then Najib couldn't make it look like it was Jho Low's problem. It's useful to know that Jho Low is the architect. He's the one behind this whole thing, and Najib was part of it, but he didn't know the whole scheme in general, and he was a big part of the cover up. Anyway, so now we have a really exciting set of guests. We have Bill McMurray and Robert Hoikling, and of course Tom. We're going to talk to them. These are the two of the key people involved in the FBI investigation into 1MDB, which was absolutely critical in understanding what this whole thing was about. So let's bring them online. Okay, keep going. We're just getting them connected in. Yes. Oh, can you guys hear me, Bill, Rob?
Yes.
Ah, perfect. Okay, we're trying to get everything kind of structured here. Rob, are you there?
I am. The joy of live podcasting.
Yeah, exactly. I don't recommend it. It's not good for your health. Excellent. Well, why don't yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Before we start, Bill and Rob, we should just say that like we've been knocked off air because of like Britain's third world internet connections.
Yeah, exactly. The internet's gone
we've
down.
only just come back on.
Yeah. Are you sure you're not under some kind of attack?
Yeah, it could
That's
be.
what a couple of YouTube commentators say. I don't think so. I think this is just like underinvestment in infrastructure.
Yes. Well, why don't we just start off, Bill? Maybe you could introduce yourself first, and then Rob as well, and just kind of explain a little bit about your career and how you came to be where you are.
Yeah, Bill, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell our viewers who you are.
Sure. Hi, Tom. Good to see you.
Good to see you, man.
My name is Bill McMurray. I'm a retired FBI agent. I was the supervisor of the 1MDB investigation. At the start of the investigation, we had just created some brand new squads in the FBI. And it just so happened that as those squads were being formed, shortly thereafter, information started coming in about this particular scandal, and became one of the first and biggest investigations that those new squads have ever done. So timing was fortuitous.
Well, tell us about the kleptocracy initiative, and also introduce Rob. Rob, maybe you can introduce yourself as well.
Sure, I'll keep it short. My name is Robert Hoikling. As Bill said, I came on right when the new international corruption squads were formed. I was lucky enough to land at the desk, and by virtue of being the first one kind of in the door, this case came in to me, and it ended up being kind of the case of my career. And so I was very lucky to work on it, and through this is how I was introduced to yourself, Tom, and Brad, and as Bill said, it kind of set the tone, and we like to think is kind of the model for how these cases can be investigated.
Well, before you came on,
yeah, sorry.
Before you guys came on, I was telling the audience a little bit about why and not to blow smoke up your ass or anything like that. why America is so unique in this, in that it tries to police globally the way that the system works, and how money that is then stolen abroad but brought back and used and spent in the States, the American government under the Kleptocracy Initiative tries to police that. Bill, so you were saying, there was this new initiative. Talk a bit about how it worked and why it was set up in the first place.
Sure. Laws have been on the books since the 1970s or so in the United States regarding foreign bribery. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act has been around for 50, 60 years now or so. And then anti-money laundering laws have matured over that same period of time. In the past, although the FBI has always had the mandate of investigating foreign bribery, there was never really any dedicated resources to those cases. And the nature of these types of investigations they're really, really difficult. They're very time consuming. There are, I guess you can make some arguments that the FBI has limited resources, and those resources should be devoted to purely domestic type issues. That over the course of time just became less and less reality. The world is just so interconnected now that most of large scale criminal enterprises are international by nature. So what ended up happening was, over the years, there were a few of these cases that were made, but they were very much sort of one-off cases that just sort of happened to come together. And there was no concerted effort by the U.S. government to actively put resources specifically on these types of investigations. So around 2014, I received a phone call. I was working international corruption matters. International organized crime and drug trafficking matters that had a heavy corruption bent to some of the investigations that I had done. So I was contacted and was told that some new squads were going to be formed. New York, where I was assigned, was going to be one of the hubs for one of these new squads, and they were going to focus on the enforcement of the FCPA, anti-money laundering or money laundering type investigations related to foreign bribery and corruption, as well as antitrust type matters. So it intrigued me because it was something that I was fairly familiar with. I was fortunate enough to spend most of my career working international type matters, which is a little unique for the FBI, and I was always drawn and attracted to that. But again, a lot of people in the FBI, they're not so much drawn to these types of cases because they are hard. They're more than just straight on criminal investigations. There's always a political piece to it. There's government to government sort of sensitivities. You have to rely on partnerships with international partners to get you the evidence and information you need to do your cases, and it can be very slow. Lots of meetings, lots of frustration. Where if you're working a more traditional investigation domestically as an FBI agent, you pretty much can just focus on your investigative strategy and working within the framework of the United States legal system. So it's much more straightforward, that kind of work. So a lot of agents. Go ahead, Tom.
No, I was going to say, when this scandal first broke, right? You guys are trying to investigate this from the Department of Justice and the FBI in the States, but the sitting Prime Minister of Malaysia, who's one of the key architects of the fraud, is in power. And you just said this, one of the difficulties of this cross-border. Rob, you started by saying this thing, you just joined this new squadron which had been set up, and this first thing onto your docket was this incredible scandal. I mean, it was terrible timing for Jho Low, wasn't it? Because in a way, the American system had set up this unit to go after exactly the kind of crime that he had just perpetrated. And maybe, is it too far to say that without that, he would got away with it, or maybe things could have gone differently?
It's always hard to try to predict the hypotheticals and alternate histories and such, but I think there's a very good chance that he, if not completely got away with it, that it may have just gone not maybe undetected, because certainly the media was on it, you all were on it, but it may not have been prosecuted to the extent that it was. Certainly, there was some, by virtue of the squad being in place, we were able to, the FBI and the Department of Justice were able to commit resources to this case and put manpower and time on it that they would not have been able to under any other circumstance. And as Bill was suggesting, these sorts of cases really require a extreme amount of focus and dedication because they're more complicated than your purely domestic cases. They take longer than your purely domestic cases, and there are so many variables to them because you're dealing with overseas jurisdictions and things that are, you know, kind of out of your control. And you know, to Bill's credit, as our supervisor, when both myself and then another our partner Justin McNair, who I know Tom, I think you've met or Brad has certainly met,
Yes.
and he's still in the FBI. Otherwise, it'd be great to have him on here as well one day. But he and I were almost put on this full time for a couple of years, and that's very rare in the FBI to be able to do that. And I think without that dedication, that attention to it, this probably would have gone unprosecuted, at least to the extent that it was.
And compared to the
Yeah,
kinds of
it seems
stuff,
that's very true. And I said before you came on, you know, like the UK just didn't care as much about this as America did. You know, there were times when I know the US had to really push the UK to do anything about it at all. So Bill, you're leading this unit in this case. Rob, you're on the case. So what do you like? Tell everyone, what do you do? I mean, when this kind of case hits your docket, what's the first thing you do? Like, or how do you build the case?
You know, maybe I'll just start with, I think before you can build the case, you have to build the team. And we were fortunate enough that not only did these units allow for dedicated active FBI personnel to be on the cases, but it also, the program came with funding for retired FBI agents and analysts to be brought back as contractors to work on these types of cases. And we were very fortunate to have some extraordinarily talented senior former FBI agents that were assigned to the case, along with Rob and Justin. And so once we assembled a team of, the original team probably was 3 or 4 prosecutors, including the head of the kleptocracy unit was very, very engaged in this from the beginning, along with 2 or 3 active FBI agents, forensic accountants, analysts, and this cadre of contractors. It was a really formidable team that we were able to put together. Really, just years and years and years of experience of dealing with complex fraud and complex money laundering schemes. So, to your point, to the you know, unfortunate timing of people like Jho Low and the other actors in this scheme, the timing, to your point, is right on. That it couldn't have been worse for them. But I'll let Rob talk about kind of the early days of like how we started piecing together some of the evidence and formulating an investigative strategy since he was leading it.
Yeah, and I mean, I could probably take up your whole show talking through some of those early days. But to focus on, I guess, a few key events, the FBI actually had a decent sized case file on Malaysia and kind of corruption matters out of Malaysia. And again, I think it goes to the timing of this, is that we were able to kind of dive into that and pull apart the pieces that were relevant to these allegations, the 1MDB case. And so we had a little bit of a foundation to start with. But without delving into some of these details, which I think are still, I don't want to say classified, but are still protected under certain things. You know, we ended up with let's just say a pile of reports about suspicious bank transactions, and I mean, it was probably totaled 100 pages or more of various information on very suspicious transactions that we had, and each of them had like a small part of what would eventually be the entire scheme. And you know, as tech savvy as we all like to pretend we are, our first attempt at figuring out what was truly going on was drawn up on a big whiteboard with dry erase markers, red, green, and blue, for the 3 different kind of schemes that we had. And amazingly, through that work, we actually, I had a picture of it. I wish I still had it. And I could share it with you all. But from where we started to where we ended up, it's amazing how close that whiteboard was to what actually had happened. And it kind of started with one MDB, and it had the money flowing through, the various entities that Jho Low had set up and coming into Los Angeles and into New York. So that kind of gave us the foundation for what was going on. And then, as is often the case in investigations like this, you have a decent idea of, the crime was committed, and you actually have a decent idea of who committed it. It's different than, say, like a bank robbery where the subject is, a masked man, and you have to go figure out who it was. Here, we knew kind of who did it, and we had a decent idea of how it was done. But the key part was going to be collecting the evidence to prosecute the case, right? And so then the next part of the strategy was, okay, where's the evidence that we need to prove this case? Who are the witnesses? Where are the documents and the records? And that was really where we almost immediately pivoted toward, okay, we're going to need to find some international cooperation. We're going to have to work with our partners overseas. And almost immediately, I think we had got on the phone with Switzerland within like the first week or two and started talking to them about what they had seen and if we could coordinate. It took a while, but we eventually got, working with the Singaporean authorities as well. And then down the road, we got a phone call kind of out of the blue from Luxembourg saying, hey, we've got a bunch of, things going on here that we don't understand. Can you guys help? And so we've kind of built an international team. And so once we kind of identified the records that we were going to go after, the people that were going to be our witnesses, then it was really the hard work and the long work of going to finding out a way to get those records. And a lot of that is fairly tedious and involves, a lot of paperwork.
It's just like journalism. It can be very tedious going through
yeah, right.
Thousands of pages of WhatsApp chats or whatever.
That's exactly right, Tom. And even when the records come in, then you have to sort through it all, right? And it's for every exciting thing we got to do, like fly somewhere great to interview someone or meet stop someone at the airport as they flew through JFK. There was 100 hours spent looking at bank records or something of that sort.
And trying to remember where you saw stuff, to cross-reference stuff, because now you imagine with AI it would be a lot easier to do this. I just want to quickly pause to say, just to make sure everyone's up to speed on what we're talking about here. So you guys were building what's called a civil forfeiture case, right? You build from the ground up, and you're not going immediately for a criminal case. It's a criminal case, but you're going for a civil asset forfeiture, which is you're going to seize the assets that have been bought with these ill-gotten gains, right?
Yes, I mean yes and no. And so there was a strategic decision made early on that we would go for the assets first to kind of lock them down before the accounts could be moved, the property could be sold, et cetera. And the reason for that is early on, Jho Low was scheduled to attend one of the black balls, if you recall. I think it was I can't Rihanna.
The cancer ball on
Alicia Keys, I think was the ball, and it was scheduled to go on, and we had found out that he was
Gabriel's ball, yeah.
That may be, yeah, and we had heard that he was going to be there, right? He had been a sponsor, and so we had planned to go try to bump into Jho Low or see if we could see him, but he didn't show up, right? And that was pretty early on in our investigation, but clearly someone had advised him better to not enter the United States, right? And that was when we realized we're probably not going to get our hands on him. He's not going to fly into the US or the UK anymore. He's going to hang out in areas where he thinks he's safe. And so then we thought, well, he still has all the property and the assets here, so we'll go after those where we can first, because that's what's available. Yeah.
Okay, can I just jump in a second, Tom?
Yeah, go ahead.
I would love to hear also, I mean, people always think that, well, so you're in a way talking about the paperwork, the kind of the tedious side of investigation, but I'd be curious to hear from both of you about what were the moments in this case that felt a little edgier or a little bit more kind of tense? When does that happen in an FBI investigation?
I mean, I'll take one, Bill, and then I let you go. But I will say one of the best experiences I had probably was, and I don't remember if I've talked about this at all, Brad, but we were tracking Jho Low's yacht, the Equanimity, and as has been reported, they had turned off their transponder, and we had a decent idea of where it had been, but not any real time information. And then I think going back to the kind of the power, if you will, of the U.S. government, we were able to talk to the FBI liaison who works out of the Pacific Command of the U.S. military and the U.S. Navy, and we ended up actually having the Navy and Coast Guard start tracking Equanimity for us. And so then we were getting real-time updates, or I guess that's not quite true, 24-hour delayed updates on where the vessel was. And I'd get them every morning in my email. And one morning, I came into Bill's office. I said, "Hey, Bill, the Equanimity has stopped moving. It's kind of hanging off the coast of Bali for 2 days straight. We should do something about this. It's in in territorial waters now." And Bill knew the legal attaché down in Indonesia, in Jakarta, named Joe Callahan, and Bill got on the phone with him, and I think within 48 hours, Joe had called us back and said, "Hey, the Indonesians are ready to do something. They'll arrest the yacht, or they'll stop it, or they're gonna keep it here for a little while." And I think 24 hours later, I was on a long flight to Indonesia, and Monday morning, after that long flight, I woke up and I think I landed at 6:30, and by 9:30, I was talking to like the chief of police in Jakarta, and we were talking about how we were going to go down to Bali and seize the Equanimity. And I think those that kind of experience just felt very surreal for me, and that's something that maybe you'd see on TV or in a movie, and um, I don't feel like I'd get that kind of that kind of experience anywhere else, but on a case like this.
Yeah, and I would say, Brad, from my perspective, some of the most intense things about this investigation were dealing with Malaysian witnesses and people that were helping us, and there was different periods of time. At the beginning of the investigation, there was lots of open cooperation, and the legal attaché, who was another friend of mine from Kuala Lumpur, was a long time Malaysian American FBI agent who had a wonderful relationship with his counterparts in Malaysia, and Malaysia had been cooperating with the FBI on things like counterterrorism issues, and was one of our key strategic partners in the region. And at first, we were getting all kinds of good cooperation, having very productive conversations with folks inside the U.S. Embassy and Malaysian counterparts, and then all of that came to a screeching halt when Prime Minister Najib dismantled the units we were working with, fired the Attorney General, and completely blew up the relationship there. It created an incredible amount of tension inside the U.S. Embassy and inside the U.S. government, weighing the different equities of this case versus all the other, things that Malaysia and America do together. So, for a career diplomat like the ambassador, these cases almost become like a nuisance, rather than something that they can really get behind, because it makes their job incredibly difficult. And that's really at the heart of why these cases are so difficult, is your targets end up being people with extreme power, whether they're heads of state or heads of particular institutions, even very significant business people that don't hold an official government position but wield a lot of power and influence in certain parts of the world. They all get involved in these cases. So there was numerous times where, especially, I've always said this, that the true sort of heroes in this story are the Malaysian, people that for the good of their country and for the defense of their young democracy, just kept pushing and pushing and pushing just to do the right thing at great peril to themselves. Where at least back then, it was unimaginable that an FBI agent that their career would be in any kind of risk of doing any investigation. Times have changed now, and that's not currently the environment that we live in here. Unfortunately, we have seen that here in America now. But at the time, we kind of take it for granted as FBI agents that, yeah, these cases are difficult. They are very time consuming, but you're not taking a huge personal or professional risk by doing these cases where our counterparts were. And the same thing held true in places like Singapore, or Singapore's relationship with Malaysia is very complicated. Lots of political and other ties there. Really hard decisions had to be made by other jurisdictions to move forward to help us with this investigation that were made at the highest level. So, multiple meetings with attorney generals from different countries, some very, very senior officials trying to decide, did they want to cooperate with us on this investigation? And luckily for us, the answer in most jurisdictions, even the ones that are known for having very high bank secrecy laws and history, said yes, and that really is what made the difference in this case.
And it's amazing that this investigation continued to push ahead, even though you've got Najib in power at the very beginning of it, saying there's been no crime. The money that I got was all a donation from the Saudi royal family, and then later Jho Low under the Trump administration is lobbying like crazy to the White House to get things dropped, but it all still pushed on. I want to make sure we're responding to a lot of the questions we're getting. Ozan Gurel, who is a friend of Brazen, he's a certified fraud examiner in New York. He asks, when you first got onto this, Rob, and you said there was a lot of incoming, he's asking, were you getting a lot of suspicious activity reports? And I think that's what you might have been referring to. This is where banks are supposed to, when they get something weird go through their system, they're supposed to file an SAR, a suspicious activity report. And that's how you or other authorities are supposed to know what's going on and what is suspicious, right? Was that important to you? Can you explain about SARs?
Yeah, I mean, generally that's right, and I can explain. I think generally what SARs are. I always feel like I'm walking a fine line because so much of this case is public. I know certain information in SARs, I think, SARs are still protected. But yes, generally banks file these suspicious activity reports, and they are automatically funneled into a system that the FBI and various other U.S. government agencies have access to. I think that is all well known. The key point of it is that they don't ping across your desk automatically, right? You still have to go find them, and I think it gives a lot of credit to the people who write them. The people in the compliance department at banks, that they take the time to do so in a kind of detailed and thorough manner, because so much for this case and other investigations, so much of your initial kind of efforts can be aided significantly by what you find in those reports. It's kind of like a first line and then kind of initial guide to give you a hint on, like, okay, we had a report of something happening. What is, I'm going to peek behind the curtain. What is actually going on, right? And in the now working in the private side, it's one of the things that Bill and I always talk about. We miss more than anything is having access to those kind of records, right? Yeah.
And Bill,
I was just going to add to that on the topic of SARs, is that it kind of, they play a bit into the strategy in these types of investigations as well, because yes, they're good lead generators at the beginning, but once the Department of Justice filed their civil complaint, and the prosecutors on this case just did a masterful job. I've heard over and over again from people that they created basically the template for what those types of complaints should look like. It was incredibly detailed, incredibly well laid out. And what you end up doing is creating a self kind of feeding system where you're putting information as the government out there, and the banks and others are absorbing that information, and it's just making their job more easier to then help the government by identifying transactions that they now have a better understanding of why they would be suspicious. I mean, one of the hardest things about these corruption cases is there's reasonable explanations of why large monies would flow from places like the Middle East and things like that. And because those jurisdictions are so opaque, it's really hard for a bank to write a SAR because a member of a royal family moved a lot of money around or bought an expensive asset, because there's lots of explanations of why that would happen. But when you lay out the fact pattern the way we did in this complaint, it then basically creates a roadmap for compliance professionals to
Well,
say, okay, I understand what's happening here now, and it makes their job easier.
Well, I got to say, for Bradley and I as well, it made our job of writing Billion Dollar Whale easier. I mean, I got to say, I read the. I mean, first of all, I love the fact that it was called U.S. versus Wolf of Wall Street, because you went after the proceeds
Right.
of the. It was full of scurrilous details. It
Tom,
had lots
if you don't, sorry to interrupt, if you don't think that title was intentional, yeah, it was.
I know, of course. And the inclusion of sexual details, and it read like I mean, for a legal document, obviously it's very thorough, but it was very, very useful to us. I mean, to build scenes for the book. It was a very readable document, given that it's also needed to stand up against attack and do its job. So kudos to you guys for that. It really is an amazing piece of work.
I have a question for you guys, a bit more pointed question, which is obviously the 1MDB prosecution or of these asset forfeitures and the prosecutions is a great success. It was all thanks to the Kleptocracy Initiative, which has now been disbanded. Do you guys feel sad about that? What do you think is on the horizon for this kind of investigations in the future from the U.S. government? And also, just to add to that, how do you feel after all this time? It's been about 10 years since Jho Low was kind of hitting his peak. I guess it would be more like 7 years since you probably got really stuck into it. But I would be curious also just to see how you feel after all this time.
Rob, you can go first.
Sure. Let me start with the second part, I guess, and maybe I can leave the first one to you. I know you and I have talked about that one a lot. So Brad, sorry, I just want to make sure the question was, how do we feel after 10 years? The fact that this is still going on.
Well, I suppose, do you feel quite satisfied with it, or what are the feelings you have about the case and the scandal itself? And I mean, are there even aspects of it that you could say, I'm not that satisfied with this part?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, I think it's hard not to be satisfied, at least in part, with the outcome. I don't know if this is still the case, but it was talked about that it was the most successful, purely in quantitative terms, asset forfeiture of a kleptocracy case in FBI and DOJ history. We were able to return, close to like $1.5 billion. I'm not sure what the exact number is now, to the government of Malaysia, the ultimate victim in this. We were able to hold, Goldman Sachs accountable to some extent. Two people were tried, or one was tried, and another one pled guilty. So there were some successes, right? And you'd like to hope there's some kind of deterrence effect in all of that, not considering some of the current administrative positions vis-a-vis the FCPA. But certainly if this would be a story that were fiction, right? Jho Low would be in handcuffs at the end, and that's not the case, and that is feeling to be farther and farther from the case. And I think that piece of it will always kind of hang over my head a little bit. Whenever we talk about this case, I always kind of ask myself, like, what could I have done differently? Could I have been more aggressive here? Could I have pursued this lead a little further? Would that have got us somewhere else? We know there are other assets still out there that we weren't able to go after. We know there are individuals that are still unnamed. And whether some of those were because we didn't have the evidence, and some were for, more kind of internal political reasons, to be honest with you. And so that stuff will always be a little bit frustrating, and just kind of have to hold on to that. But I think I try to go back to the fact that this case especially, right, and in no part thanks to you all, has really, I think, set an example and been publicized to the point that it hopefully does have that deterrent effect, and it does tell people that you can't get away with this, and the U.S. government is or was at least paying attention to these matters. And at the end of the day, I think we always try to tell ourselves that's the end goal, right? Is that we're not only holding people accountable, but we're trying to prevent people from repeating this same kind of behavior. And Bill, I'm going to punt on the first part to you.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess, and Brad, you and I specifically have talked about this topic in the past. And this is before the current administration's decisions on allocation of resources as it relates to these types of cases. Just to clarify, all but one of the FBI squads that were formed in 2015 are still in place. So there are still agents dedicated to work in these types of cases. There are prosecutors that still have these cases. They're just have been reassigned to other units that have at DOJ that don't have they don't have the luxury, I guess, of having just exclusively to focus on these types of cases. And this administration has made it clear to focus on issues related to foreign bribery that are in alignment with U.S. interests. And I don't disagree with some of that thought process. I would say that anyone who has spent any time working public corruption type cases in general, whether they're domestic or international, there is this weird dynamic when you work those types of cases where good rational people can twist a righteous investigation around and create a narrative that it's based on some sort of political agenda. And those types of cases are the only cases that put the FBI in a really, really difficult position. And there has been talk in the past of like, well, why don't we just have like an anti-corruption agency that does nothing but corruption work, and that way it can be completely objective. But the reality is, I'm not a proponent of that, because they're really, really difficult investigations. You need the very best investigators that this country has to offer to work these types of cases. And the FBI is the quintessential investigative agency in the world, as far as I'm concerned. And so you need that kind of gravitas that comes with it. You need the experience that you gain from investigating other things. You need a broader a mandate to develop the skill sets that you need to do these types of cases. But at the end of the day, it puts a target on the FBI's back, or any agency that works these public corruption cases. No matter how righteous you try to be, it's just the nature of it's just human nature, right? And it can be demoralizing. Like when we form these squads, two cases, the first two cases that were really fully sort of put on our docket in New York were the cases involving the 1MDB investigation, and then cases around the Lava Jato scandal in Brazil. Right, Petrobras and Odebrecht and those types of cases. Extremely large, complicated, multinational investigations that required incredible amounts of resources, not just from America, but from around the world. And here we are 10 years later, and Lula is the president of Brazil again after being convicted and going to jail, and he's back in power. And UMNO is back in power, or Najib's party back in Malaysia. And there is this kind of sense of like, what are we doing this for? Bill,
in the book, you're famously quoted as saying you're a glass half full guy, right?
Yeah.
You can look at the world and it's a glass half empty or glass full. Like that was 8 years ago now, 7 years ago. So would you reappraise that?
No, I wouldn't. I'm just I guess I would say I'm a realist, in that any structure that's built by human beings is going to be broken by its very nature, right? And when you get into politics, and the ultimate seats of power, it corruption is baked into it, and it's almost like people are numb to that and expect that. And when you do investigations that are so disruptive, there is an element of society that says, all you're doing is hurting the one side that's in power right now, and the other side's going to come in and fill that void and do the same thing. So why not just let the people that are giving me what I want, or that I agree with their agenda versus the other agenda, just leave them alone and let them stay in there, because all you're going to do is just put the other people in, and you're going to have the same problems.
But in terms of the glass half empty, which is
Yeah.
definitely what I am, isn't it easier now if I look at Tim Leissner, the Goldman partner who admitted to helping
Yeah.
steal hundreds of millions of dollars, gets 2 years in jail. I look at that.
Yeah.
I look at the squadrons the squads are still in place, but the kleptocracy initiative has been ended, right? Isn't it easier now if Jho Low, as we're gonna get into our final hour of this, we're gonna be turning to like where he is, what he's doing, why he's still operating, and isn't it easier for people like that now? Because if the US is not fully focused on transnational crime, nobody is, in my view, right?
Absolutely. America, again, this is where I'm not a big fan of like the heavy populist, sort of build walls around the United States and pretend that the United States doesn't have this obligation to be what America is. The reality is that's part of the cost of the U.S. dollar being the main currency in the world, and it comes at the cost of being a superpower. Is you do have to take on that kind of responsibility, and I think it's historically been baked into the U.S. and the Western mindset that for me, my overarching kind of soapbox that I get on now is America and the West needs to lean into transparency. As painful as that can be, you need to lean into transparency, because that's where the West will win. If you stay in a more opaque, condemn the media, say they're always lying, just use the kind of tactics that are used in more autocratic places, democracy loses in that environment, and that means America and the West loses. And we should be leaning into transparency, whether it hurts or not, because if we walk away from that responsibility, that void will be filled by our adversaries much better than it can ever be filled in a democratic environment, and we will lose. The West will lose in the long run, and that is my main focus, sort of after the FBI, my career in the FBI, is trying to promote that in the private sector.
Well, Bill and Rob, thanks so much for taking the time to come on our broadcast and give your very valuable insights from inside the room, which I think people don't get to hear that often. And congratulations on the work you did all those years ago and for many years after, up until very recently. As you said, it wouldn't have happened without the work you did and your colleagues. And we've enjoyed getting to know you over the years as well. Thanks for being on. And Bradley, I think now we're going to move to something. I'm sure Bill and Rob will keep on listening, but we're going to move to something a little lighter than the future of Western democracy in America's world.
There you go. There you go.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Bradley,
thanks, Tom and Brad.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Bye.
So Bradley, what do we have up next?
Okay, this is the final countdown now. We've been here for 3 hours nearly. We've talked about the lighthearted stuff. We talked about the heavy stuff, the future of democracy. Now it's time to get down a little bit more into the brass tacks. I think just as a small relief, we're going to play the Jynwel Capital corporate video for a few minutes, just to kind of set the tone as we pivot straight back to Jho Low. We're going to be talking about the Jho Low coin, how we found him, the details. There's going to be a picture, so So everybody should be hanging on tight, getting ready for the exciting part. We also have one more guest, Xavier Justo, coming up as well with some interesting new information. But before then, I just think it's always important to return back to the original Jynwel Capital video, one of the greatest corporate videos of all time.
How do we define value?
Oh dear, so quotable.
Is it something we can see? Something we can taste?
This probably costs millions of dollars.
Is quality something we can hear? Is excitement something we can touch? How do you quantify luxury?
So Jynwel Capital is
synergies
to be
value
clear,
for
is the family kind of investment company that Jho Low created
for a lifetime.
that was essentially completely funded by 1MDB money. So this was the vehicle he used to pretend to be wealthy everywhere he went. And they got everybody from Abu Dhabi, New York, you name it, to kind of join this video. That's Jho Low, his brother, and that's Jho Low on the left.
Nothing slips beneath.
That's Abu Dhabi's Yas Island.
Our approach is to fundamentally question how quality is created, how to enhance value, identify synergies, capitalize on efficiency, and maximize potential. Then we can enjoy bringing creativity and expertise to a deal and execute it in our own way.
Amazing. Amazing how he said nothing in several words.
By consistently growing the value of its investments, Jynwel has built a network of partnerships with providers of quality the world over.
I would say this video is the epiphany of Jho Low, because it's all about using the cachet of other people to give himself legitimacy, you know?
What's very important to us is to work with partners that are uncompromising when it comes to the refusal to accept mediocrity. Partners who have the courage of their convictions to go out and set new standards.
More Abu Dhabi.
As we try and accomplish the goals that we've set out for ourselves, partnership helps us get from point A to point B.
Walid is now sort of the de facto head of Mubadala in terms of the operator.
Organization. In Jynwel, we have found a partner that not only shares the same passion for investing that we do, but also is a match for our values.
The mining business requires a long-term view.
This guy is actually a fascinating character who's still very involved in the Middle East. Kaplan is his name. Electrum Group.
You seek partners who share your sense of social and environmental commitment.
When we look at a deal, we want to see positive developments, not just in the next few years, but also in 30 years' time.
That's
And when you build on quality, you build for the long term. Whether you're building dynamic networks, pathways, relationships, or if you're building unstoppable momentum,
We have to be quick to recognize opportunities embedded in the markets based on law, jurisdiction, and culture.
How many cities?
when you collaborate thoughtfully and purposefully and deliver informed ideas with conviction.
Now this is
your
Jho Low's
actions influence
lingerie
others.
company that he operated. Very odd acquisition.
Jynwel really understand luxury and the values behind Myla. They understand the brand and they're nurturing us because they have a vision of where we are and where we need to be.
It's not just about the quality of your investment. It's how you do it that counts.
Caring about fair royalty rates for artists, songwriters, and content creators is by far the most important thing for art. If we're not supporting that artistic community, I don't think we'll be able to encourage that type of bravery and boldness that really creates the timeless classics.
It's all about money. That's what she's saying.
It's about keeping to their word, meeting in person, and believing in the handshake.
What do we look for in a partner? Someone first and foremost whose word is their bond. That when they say they're going to do something, you can bank it.
I would just add to that you should check that the money is theirs in the first place.
Aspect to our way of life.
Value shared is value gained.
I think the beauty in a partnership for us is to work with a collaborator that has reached not only into our world, but into other worlds. They make introductions to others that we could simply never make on our own. That makes us better, it makes us stronger, and it helps us to grow.
And true quality transcends language and culture.
The key to bringing different partners together is in finding ways that we can all work together.
We have worked hand in hand with Jynwel across multiple projects and multiple investments across multiple geographies.
Everything that they've done since we have become partners has reinforced the fact that they really mean it.
These guys must hate
It's not
this video.
just about making a quick fix. It's about
terrible.
making an impact.
It is about how each deal changes a community, a country, and the world.
Excellent. One of the great videos for sure. Oops. All right, that was excellent. Now I feel totally refreshed. That was Jho Low's Jynwel Capital. This was the company that he used and that he was building up a myth around. That not only, one of the funny things about Jho is in the very beginning, he made it sound like he was the concierge, the guy that helped get things done. But by the end, when Jynwel Capital was at its peak, he had reinvented himself and said, actually, I'm the scion of $1 billion family. My grandfather was extremely wealthy, and we're just finally coming out into the world and being public. And it was all completely made up. It was not some newly discovered family fortune. It was just 1MDB money that had flowed into his bank accounts via a crazy offshore network. Okay, so here's what's going to happen over the next hour. First, we're going to start off with Xavier Justo in just a moment. Then we're going to get into another 3 reveals. So we've got 4 reveals over 1 hour. And here is Xavier Justo. Hello.
Good afternoon. Hello, good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm okay. Can you see me well?
Yeah, I can see you. I can see you, yeah. We've had some technical difficulties all day, but so far we're getting through, you know? Excellent, Xavier. Well, welcome. Maybe you could just tell us a bit about what you've been up to the last couple of years. I mean, obviously you've got a sort of international reputation as the whistleblower that helped uncover the 1MDB scandal. Maybe you could just kind of update us on where you are and what in your life and what you're working on. I think maybe it's a bit slow.
Since the 1MDB scam was exposed, life has been. Is it you or is it me? It's
No.
reconnecting.
Okay, keep going. Let's see here. Oh, there's a bit of a disconnection. Hold on. We'll just try really quick here to reconnect. It'll just take a minute, hopefully. Yeah. Let's see. Okay. He'll be back in just a moment. Everybody, hold on to your hats. We're going to keep the pace up over the next hour, but we still have been having some serious technical difficulties today. But I'm grateful for everyone who's still sticking around with us. and sending us comments and questions. And I know it's very late in Malaysia as well, so let's keep it going. Let's see here. Okay. Any sign of him? No. Okay. Well, until then, let's see. How should we do this? Does anybody want to send in some questions for us while we are waiting for our guest to return? We really want to keep the momentum going, but we can also answer questions. I'm looking at our YouTube channel. I'm looking at the X account, LinkedIn. Just try to send me a question one way or another, because we want to also hear from people. We also have some merch to give out. And if somebody sends in a really good question, we'd be happy to send you a world tour T-shirt. And oh, here we go. I think he's coming back. Maybe, let's see. Not yet. Soon, hopefully. 1 second here. Maybe I'll just recap a little bit, since we're going to get into this kind of final stage here. Oh yeah, here we go. Any updates on the movie? Okay, sure. We can give an update on the movie. So with the film, obviously we've been trying to develop this film for a long time with our friends at SK Global. They are the same company that produced Crazy Rich Asians and among other projects. And we have kind of gone back and forth over the years about the right format for it, but we're finally in a state now where it feels like we're going to enter production in the near term. We have a great script writer. All of the details of who's going to be cast as a position and stuff. Oh, here we go. Yeah. So anyways, long story short, much more to come on that, and we'll be sharing with everyone. Xavier, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I don't know. There is a lot of wind here. I mean, the south of Spain, so I don't know if it's me
No problem.
or the network.
Yeah,
I have no idea.
no problem at all. I can hear you now. So why don't you just kind of give us a bit of an update on yourself, and we'll just kind of start from there.
Okay, so since the scam was exposed in 2015 and I was arrested, released early 2017, has been quite complicated for me and for my family, but we're still fighting. I mean, the Petro Saudi boys have been sentenced, now has been sentenced, and like you, like a lot of people, still like it's disconnected.
Xavier, maybe you should turn off your camera. It might work a little better because we're getting a bit patchy from over here. Just keep talking, but turn your camera off. It might reduce the.
Okay, I'm trying to turn off the camera.
Okay.
It's connecting for the team. We can.
Okay. Well, just back to the movie for a second then. So yeah, we're really hoping that in the next few months there's going to be some seriously exciting attachments on the director level, on the actor levels, and all the hope is that we'll be starting to film next year. And well, people have been asking about Leonardo DiCaprio and whether or not he'll be somebody that is somehow connected to this film. And to be honest, the project is not really about the celebrities. I mean, they feature. There's the idea of celebrities featuring, but it's not really all about the celebrities. As far as I know, people like Leonardo DiCaprio haven't indicated they want to play themselves, though I think it would be a good idea. Better to play yourself than somebody else to potentially play yourself. Yeah, so that's good. And then let's see here. Any idea what Jho Low thinks of you two? Well, I tend to think he's not the biggest fan at this point, because we sort of are not. We're kind of relentless about this, and I'm sure that's not going over very well over there. Probably there's a feeling that if it wasn't for people who get kind of obsessed like this, that there's a kind of a belief that they could just disappear, or they could even recover or reinvent themselves. But I think we're just having continuous problems here with Xavier, so I'm just going to get Tom back. On. And then we'll just finish this, get into the good stuff. unfortunately, we lost Xavier. He had a good tidbit, but we'll just have to share it on a separate place. But you know, it's amazing how much 1MDB has affected so many people, including Xavier. Obviously, he went to jail. He in Thailand and had a terrible experience. I actually read Xavier's book about it, and it was actually quite eye-opening for me because I didn't know the actual experience he had. I knew high level what happened and all the different ways he sort of manipulated, but I didn't know that. Okay. Yeah. Let's just get Tom on now. Okay, let's try it one more time. Xavier?
I'm so sorry for that. I think it's the wind here.
Okay.
Disturbing
I
the
hear
network.
you pretty clearly right now, though.
Nothing I can. Okay, I'm sorry for that. I mean, thanks for the invitation. Sorry not to be.
No problem.
Not to be there. Like, yes, I was saying we are all waiting, like Malaysia, some Malaysians, not all of them, and yourself probably among them.
Sorry, Xavier, we're still having trouble. I think we've had bad luck today. We've had bad luck today with connection. Sorry.
So, okay, I'm sorry for that. It's disconnecting again.
Oh no, now I hear you again. So you're back. Okay, he's lost him. Okay, well I think we'll have to give up on that one now. Well, let's just get so Tom's gonna come join in now. We're unfortunately we'll have to do Xavier another time, but so let's just kind of back up. So Tom and I, we started chasing this story at the Wall Street Journal. We had a couple of moments, interesting moments, where we got kind of close to catching Jho Low. One of those moments was we did something very simple. This is hilarious in a way, but we had a reporter start calling hotels around Shanghai asking for Jho Low. And one of the hotels picked up the phone and said, "Oh yes, Mr. Low, he's our long-term our long-term guest here. Do you want to leave a message?" Within 24 hours, I had got on a plane from New York and was in Shanghai at that hotel, staying in the same hotel, which was the Peninsula in Shanghai. And I was so excited, but also so scared to be. Hey, Tom, are you there? I think Tom's,
hello.
Yeah, Tom's on. Okay, I was just telling a story about when I chased Jho to the Peninsula Hotel. And so I stayed in the hotel, and every day I was kind of skulking around the peninsula, looking for Jho Low, and trying to understand where exactly is he staying in this hotel. Is he staying in a hotel room? Is he staying in the something nearby? And so I went to the concierge and I said, "Is Jho available? I'm his friend. I'm here." And they said, "Yeah, he's in the residences." So I went over to the residences. I asked for him, and they just said to me, "We've never heard of Jho Low in our lives." And then I went back to the concierge, and she said to me, I said, "Well, they just said he's not here. He's never been here, and they never heard of him before." And she looked at her computer, and there was something that happened on the screen. I can't be sure what. It looked like it kind of turned red or something. And she's like, "Yes, that's correct. He never was here. We've never heard of him before." So that was one of my near misses. Then I subsequently chased Joe's yacht, and I showed up, and I literally knocked on the door of the yacht. Tom did the same thing in Thailand. So that was kind of our near misses. Then a little bit later, right after the fall of Najib, we also got pretty close. We knew of a certain place that Jho was going to be in Hong Kong at one point, and we tried to find a way to confirm that he was there, but he sort of always managed to disappear at the last minute. And so we've really struggled over the years to actually understand exactly where he was. We had such fascinating, penetrating insights into him as well. At times, people that were near him heard him talk. We heard so many fragments of phrases that he said out loud in unguarded situations. So a couple of years ago, when Tom and I first started whale hunting and Brazen, we did a show called Where is Jho? And in that show, we found a few things, didn't we, Tom? We found, we got a picture of Jho at an aquarium in Macau. I think that was one of the pictures. Then we found we found an application for the Royal Hong Kong Yacht Club, and we published that. We recently published that picture that somebody sent us the picture as well. So that was a kind of interesting clue. What's going on in Hong Kong, and then we got then a really exciting thing happened in the first Where Is Jho campaign, which is we got a picture of Jho Low at Disneyland Shanghai, and he was sitting at a table with a bunch of people having lunch. So we kind of knew that he was floating around, and we did a lot of also kind of financial investigation. We looked at the different corporate records, and there was a Chinese company that was called, I forget what it's called now, but it was related to a BVI company, and we found records showing how much money it had. But still, in a way, we kind of lost our edge on that, right, Tom? And so a couple of months ago, we were able to talk about it.
I think one of the most exciting things we found at that spot was that time was that he had an office in the Shanghai World Financial Center, which is that building on the Pudong side with the hole in it with the observation deck where tourists go up, and that Jho Low actually had a registered office there and was working there. So we had this sense that he was, able to operate quite freely in China. And obviously we had that famous photo of him in the Shanghai Disneyland that somebody sent in to us at that time. And that photo was excellent because it had a couple of people in the background who we were able to identify as his minders. So, and we're talking about, a few years ago now, so dated information, slightly dated information, but that he was sort of able to move around, but he had Chinese minders, official minders. We'd heard that he had, we know for sure that he had these high-level Chinese backers. So we should back up a little bit and say, how do we know, before people sent in these photos of the Shanghai Disneyland, we knew he was in China, or suspected he was in China because of the history of his connections to China. And the way that worked was, when the scandal first broke in 2015, with the first media stories about him, Najib, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, was still in power, and he said, "Look, Jho Low, get out of Malaysia because you'll be getting noticed on planes and things in the country, and we're trying to keep this thing hush hush." So he goes off to China, where he has his family. He's a Malaysian Chinese, but he has some family, we believe, in Chuchao Chinese in China. So he goes there, and he's got billions of dollars, don't forget, that he's stolen. So he's able to corrupt a number of very high-ranking Chinese officials, including a guy called Sun Lijun, who was head of the domestic security in China, so a very high-ranking person, and another guy who became the trade minister of China. And the reason we know all this is because when Najib lost power after the elections in 2018, the people from the next government in Malaysia gave us some documents, and they included minutes of these meetings in China that Jho Low had attended with these people, Sun Lijun and this other minister, talking about doing these corrupt deals in Malaysia, these corrupt infrastructure deals. So what Jho Low was effectively doing at this time was doing more corrupt deals with China, moved on to China basically from his whole Middle East 1MDB fraud, and was stealing even more money to fill the holes of the fraud that went before, the 1MDB fraud. So this is like post 1MDB. And they were going to build a railroad down the east coast of Malaysia, and they were going to pad that contract by tens of millions of dollars, steal it, and share out the bounty between these Chinese officials, Jho Low and the government basically. And so it was a really interesting period, and one in which Malaysia, which has basically been a pretty much like Western-facing country, I'd say. Actually, maybe not. Mahathir was pretty anti-Western, but is seen as an ally. Was very close, getting much closer to China, and yeah. So since then, this is going back to 2016, 17. Since then, all of those Chinese officials have been arrested. The ones that we knew were very close to Jho Low and involved in this scheme. Sun Lijun got arrested for corruption. The Trade and Industry Minister got arrested for corruption. When they got arrested, the Chinese government didn't say this is to do with connections to Jho Low, but it arrested these figures nonetheless. So when we started this meme coin and the attempts to get more information about him, Bradley, that was where we were at, right, in terms of what we knew about him. And so we suspected he was in China, but we didn't really have any new information. So why don't we talk a little bit about the Hong Kong company that we found out
Well, I mean,
about?
I think, yeah. So I think, in a sense, we've been hearing lots of things. We hear things from our network, but when we created this Jho Low meme coin, we put ourselves in front of a new audience. Essentially, we put ourselves in front of people who are not really consumers of journalism. They just could be people who are even kind of like high flyers. People who are interested in making money, people who are interested in the brashness of this, or even just people who don't read newspapers. And so that is part of what we're going to talk about. But first, essentially, we have three things we want to reveal. The first thing is, what is Jho Low up to? This is going to be a little bit more complicated to explain than the next two parts after that. But essentially, we have determined that through both sources and through some new documents that have emerged, that Jho Low has become, he came to China, by the way, and was just, didn't really know anyone. And it's hard for us to explain this, but we actually have some of Jho Low's Google history from that time when he first showed up in China. And he was literally going through searching all of the political figures and trying to understand who's who here. Who can I connect myself with? That's what led to what Tom described before, him playing this role of essentially becoming this kind of shadow broker between China and Malaysia, and to shift Malaysia away from the United States and towards China in exchange for money. Najib obviously signed all these deals where lots of money went missing. And one of the things we can reveal about that China part is that according to a very high-level Malaysian government source, they have determined the following numbers related to Malaysia. So let me just pull this exactly up. So they have calculated that the 1MDB scandal, this is the internal numbers that haven't come out publicly. They never mentioned this publicly. The internal numbers say that about $12 billion is considered the financial damage of 1MDB itself. And that includes like SRC and the other kind of subsidiaries. So 7.65 billion of that was stolen money. So if you go back to 1MDB, about $13 billion was raised. 7.65 was outright stolen. The remainder between 7.65 and 12 billion is all of the financial kind of cost of having this debt. So that's the interest, and it's all the other kind of penalties that came about. They had a special secondary loan with Deutsche Bank, and they had to pay. And one of the things that's interesting about 1MDB is all the holders of these bonds in the world refuse to sell them back to Malaysia because they love this bond. It's a very high interest, and they can't not pay it. So of the 7.65 billion stolen, they have calculated that 2.5 billion was stolen by Jho Low by himself. So he personally took control of 2.5 billion. Now, if you recall, from the gentleman before from the FBI, only about $1 billion has been recovered in terms of actual assets, right? So imagine the difference. Think of the delta between that 1 billion-ish recovered and 7.65 stolen, 2.5 of Joe's. So this kind of confirms something that we know, which is that Jho has a lot of money, and he was, even at one point, he somehow got some of this billions into China. He was pulling out cash in Macau and flying it on a helicopter to Hong Kong, where it was deposited in various companies and used to pay legal bills and other things all around the world. So we're talking about $12 billion financial damage, 7.65 stolen, 2.5 stolen by Jho. But here's where it gets crazy. This China portion of the situation, the Belt and Road deals, these are huge tens of $1 billion deals. Malaysia has calculated that they lost $6 billion in that. That's almost the same amount that they lost in the 1MDB stolen money phase. And that's both money that's gone missing and money that's like penalties related to this Belt and Road deal. So that $6 billion is key. That's why Jho has more money than people even think, and more power and more influence. And he's become this powerful person in China. So let's get to the first reveal. So what we've determined is that Jho Low, we're going to get to the location at the end, but first we're going to talk about what's his job. He has become a kind of advisor working for the Chinese government with special situations. Among those situations are companies, major Chinese companies that are dealing with the US government problems. And it's kind of surreal to think about this, but Jho has developed a kind of reputation within China as a strategist or a problem solver when it comes to the US government, because he has this sort of lobbying network. I mean, you can argue that they're being kind of misled because he's never successfully lobbied the US government. But this group of people that he has around him and he himself are helping with different lobbying things. So one of the interesting new things that has arisen is that Jho Low had so many lawyers, like an army of lawyers. But one of the most closest lawyers to him of all is a man called Robin Rathmell. And he was at Cobre and Kim earlier on. And he's since now started his own law firm. And anybody who knows Robin Rathmell knows that he is one of the key legal advisors to Jho Low. And he recently filed a very interesting, what's called a FARA, or a Foreign Agents Registration Act, where he revealed that he is now working for a company. We're going to share this link in a few minutes. He's now working for a company that is sanctioned by the United States. Let's just pull this company's name up. He's working for a company that is sanctioned by the United States. And even more interesting, if you dig deep into the documents, you'll find that not only that, but he's also receiving payments for this company from another company in Hong Kong that is a mysterious shell company with a single shareholder in mainland China. So this is obviously, this is us connecting the dots. This isn't our big reveal. But we believe that this is an example of one of the things that Jho Low has caused to happen, which is essentially using his team to help these sensitive Chinese special situations. So that's kind of, and then obviously from our earlier discoveries, we found that Jho Low has an office in the Shanghai Financial Center. But the real question remained to us is Jho Low, a long time we were wondering, is he in hiding? Is he almost like locked down? If you think about it, he was a Chinese intelligence operative, essentially, when it comes to Malaysia. He became that, a spy. But we wondered, is he still a spy, or do they consider him more of a problem and they want to kind of keep him locked up? And one of his patrons was Sun Li-jun, which Tom talked about as well. And that guy went to prison and for corruption. And we wondered, if you lose your patron, are you out? Are you out of business? But what we've learned from a variety of sources, including what we're going to reveal soon, is that he's actually back in business in a big way. And he's operating with almost complete abandon. So let's move on, Tom, to our first of the two bigger reveals. Arnav, can you guys cue up the picture, please? Okay, so don't press it yet. So through the Jho Low coin, we received intelligence that not only is Jho Low operating, he's living a life of luxury. He's driving in fancy cars. His family are traveling around outside of China as well. They're going to Europe. They're going to different places, and they're basically living the kind of a version of the life that Jho Low once lived, not that long ago. And now, how does Jho do it? How does he move around? What is the mechanism that he's able to, even potentially open bank accounts or sign documents or whatever it might be? There's a few ways. We know about a few things. We know that he has these cutouts, that people that pay bills for him on behalf of him. One of them is a guy called Fing Fian Laugumnerd, a Thai guy that pays, for example, he has a very fancy concierge service here in London. This guy, Fing Fian, pays those guys, and they in turn do a variety of services for them. But through the Jho Low coin, we have obtained this picture, which we're going to now unveil by pressing the yellow button. It's a bit slow for dramatic effect. This, and here we go. This is Jho Low's new passport, everyone. Meet Konstantinos Vase from Australia. His birth date is not too far from his actual birth date. This is an amazing document. This is the most up-to-date photograph of Jho Low that exists. This is also an indication of the kind of sophistication this guy has become. Jho Low used to be a sort of an amateur. He was a kind of a cuddly character in the early days. And he wasn't very good at money laundering because even we were able to find all of kinds of evidence of money laundering. And if a journalist can find out, you've really messed up. But over time, he became the kind of person that's traveling around using a fake passport to check into hotels and different things. Potentially, we don't know, maybe using it to open bank accounts. And he's the kind of person that flies money from Macau in a helicopter to Hong Kong and deposits it in companies and pays around the world. This guy has become a supervillain, essentially. And so anyways, when we saw this passport, and we had to do a lot of work around verifying its authenticity as a piece of evidence, not authenticity as a passport, because it's obviously fake. His name is not Konstantinos Achilles Vase from Australia. And I actually think it's almost a bit comical, don't you think, Tom, that he would walk around saying, "Hi, I'm Konstantinos."
Yeah, I wonder whether it's got anything to do with the fact that he had that whole Cyprus document that he had bought back in the day and moved around with. Anyway, that's just total speculation. But I think what's crucial here is this guy who, as you've explained, Bradley, is able to operate in China with an office that we know in Shanghai, is also able to, and we know he's used this passport to check in at places and to move around, right? Inside China and elsewhere. It's just one of the ways that he can circumnavigate this problem that he has, which is he's toxic. So he can't use normal banking system. He can't open accounts. He can't move money. He's obviously got access to crypto. I'd imagine we don't actually have evidence of that, but I'd imagine he does. But this kind of document is going to help him to be able to do things like open bank accounts, check in at hotels, move, and like you said, he doesn't just rely on documents. For his family, he relies on cutouts. His family is. Actually, we had a question just popped up from Geopolitical Guy. Geopolitical Guy asks, "Do you know what happened to Jho Low's family?" So, as Bradley was saying, his wife. He was with this woman the whole time. It's his high school girlfriend, I think, from Penang in Malaysia, whom he married and has kids with. She's been with him the whole time. She's not indicted, but she's living the life of luxury in Europe in ski resorts and all of that kind of thing, using cutouts. But for Jho Low, it's not as easy because he's recognizable, and he needs these fake documents to be able to just do some ordinary things. And so, the fact that we were able to get hold of this passport and also, we're protecting the source because we don't want to really finger the source, but the passport was used in a number of real life situations that show us a little bit about how he's operating. And it also, the way that the passport was used in the country means that he's not actually under lock and key, which is what some people had been suspecting, right, Bradley, that he was, not really able to go anywhere. Turns out that it seems like he's able to move around pretty freely, and his family, at least, still having holidays in Europe.
Yeah, and I think let's also reflect on this for a second. We've been trying to find Jho Low for a long time, right? And we've had some evidence, some things came in, so there was a photograph, but ironically, this project that we did has been the most successful thing we've ever done as journalists on the Jho Low, hunt part of it, and it's just about, it makes me really reflect on something, which is, ironically, the people that are the result that helped us with these two things this one that we just revealed and the next thing, neither one of them actually was looking for the financial reward related to this. They actually just heard about the project because of it. And so it's kind of interesting, and we said in this white paper that we created around the case for the $ Jho Low coin, which you can find, which we'll share as well, that sometimes journalism or certain causes, like the cause for truth, requires a kind of outside the box decision that you make, or or outside the box strategy. And that's exactly what this is. This was a crazy idea, and it's kind of blows our mind that it actually worked. You know, we never said that we were trying to get rich on the Jho Low coin. We wanted to just get the word out about this guy and get more people interested in it. And this is what's happened. So I think it's time now to pivot to the next part of this. Can we cue the next part, please? So just to kind of set this up, don't press the animation yet. Just to set this up. So this part is a little bit more complicated. It's not as simple as a single photograph, though this photograph was critical in reaching the next part of this. Essentially, we received information, and it took a lot of time and a lot of back and forth with this person, and then a lot of cross verification. But essentially, we were able to determine a series of facts about where Jho Low is living, exactly where he's living. And the person that was reaching out to us sort of pulled out at one point, but they gave us enough details to narrow down some candidates for the place that Jho Low is living. And then, this is always true in journalism, once you basically know the answer, it's much easier to confirm it. If you're asking open-ended questions, that's when it's hard. So this other person that reached out to us, they told us that the place where Jho Low is living is relatively near his office. It has certain conditions, certain structural shape, you know, and in a way they thought they were being vague enough to not have us identify the place. But as anyone knows who follows me on LinkedIn, I'm an AI forward journalist, and we basically built a very complex Chinese language search process to identify locations that could fit these conditions of what we had learned. And so essentially through this process, starting with a source, then with cross verification, then using some other tools and things which we can't talk about because we could hurt some of our resources and the people that we're speaking to, we basically figured out the exact neighborhood almost close to the house where he's staying. And so we're going to just now do that so everyone can see this place. Okay, here we go. Welcome to the neighborhood of Green Hills, Shanghai. This is a super luxurious neighborhood known for its expat residents. Everybody who lives in this area lives in a house that's separate from everywhere else. It's actually not very Chinese in a sense. So what we've been able to determine is that Jho Low lives in a house in this Green Hills neighborhood, and that he has luxury cars just like he's always had, like Bugattis and that sort of thing. He has, everywhere he goes, he's followed by at least 2 Chinese security guards who have every indication of being government employees. And so can you guys play some of the videos of this real estate development? So it's very interesting. This area, it's very private. There's a lot of foreigners that live there, and I'm sure some people may now hear about it from this broadcast who they're living next to. But essentially, this person, Jho Low, he's living in this place with his family, and he's traveling to that office, and he's working on these sensitive Chinese cases, and he's living the life of a billionaire. Essentially, he's living the life of a billionaire in Shanghai, and I would imagine, I'd love to hear from Malaysians, but it's pretty galling, because we're talking about a place that has, first of all, China has denied Jho Low's in the country many times, and any kind of official communications. Let's turn this. This is an example. You know, in China, they don't use TikTok. They use their own service. We've managed to pull some of the videos of this neighborhood. Let's turn the volume down. So we'll let this play in the background when we talk about it. But essentially, this is like a very luxurious expat neighborhood you're like the head of a bank or something, or the head of a major corporation. This is where you live. It's very private. It's set aside from other houses and places. It's not the kind of place where people can hear what you're talking about in your house. So this is the state of affairs.
I think the annual, the monthly rent on one of these places is around 70,000 yuan, or like 10,000 US a month. So very, very expensive for Beijing. Developments like a couple of decades old, started building in 2004. It's known as Green Hills, and also Greenland Villas. It seems to have a couple of different names in English, right? But huge American-style houses. You can see there from that picture. It's got this. If you look at them, they're wooden constructions, much like they would be built in the States, with awnings, porticos. Those are the kind of houses you might get in Greenwich, Connecticut, or something like that, right? Although slightly ersatz versions, maybe. But yeah, and this looks very rural, right, with the lakes and the trees and all of this, but it's actually just a stone's throw. It's like a 15-minute car ride from the Shanghai World Financial Center, which is where, a few years ago, Bradley and I were able to identify that was where Jho Low has an office. So, putting those two together, he's got a house there, a short commute to an office, and, he's operating with fake documents, and he's definitely not under the kind of house arrest we thought he might be at one point, right?
Yeah, and he also has the utmost confidence that he will emerge from this unscathed somehow or another, which is something else we've picked up along the way. So it's a pretty incredible story, because most of the time when you have an international fugitive who's stolen billions of dollars, they can't live like this somewhere. If you think about Jan Marsalek from the Wirecard scandal, or kleptocrats who escape, it's just not quite like this, And usually when a kleptocrat escapes to Dubai or something, they keep their mouth shut, and they kind of keep a low profile as much as possible. And I think there's just something about Jho Low that is really remarkable, and kind of it's amazing that he has almost no shame as well. And I guess
we should say, Bradley, that our understanding of why he's not sent back to Malaysia has shifted slightly, hasn't it? Because back in 2017-18, when we first reported that he'd been involved in these corrupt deals in Malaysia involving the infrastructure there, which were Chinese infrastructure deals in Malaysia, Chinese companies building railroads there, and they were taking money off the top there and sharing it out between these corrupt officials and Jho Low and Malaysian officials. We thought, well, Jho Low won't be sent back to face justice in Malaysia, because if he enters a courtroom, then he'll be saying all kinds of things about Chinese officials that would be very, very bad for those officials, right? But now I think, I don't know, actually maybe you don't agree with me, this is what I think, he's playing it's more a positive thing for some Chinese officials that he's able to, he's able to act as this useful billionaire. He's perhaps able to be a front for movements of huge amounts of money still. He actually has huge amounts of money that he's able to put. We don't know the answers to these questions, by the way, exactly. But the fact that we've been able to identify that he's living here, and that he has, freedoms of movement that we wouldn't have thought possible, using fake documents and the like, that he's actually, it's not just about stopping him going back to Malaysia and the embarrassment of that, because those, as we said earlier, those officials that he had interacted with on those corrupt deals have been arrested. It's more that he's actually helping doing new things that we don't actually know the full import of at the moment, right?
Yeah. Let's just recap the whole thing for a second. I think we have to just kind of say what we know. This is a guy, first of all, we said about the numbers in Malaysia, 2.5 billion stolen, probably call it 700 of that recovered by the US government. Then on top of that, another $6 billion missing from these Chinese deals that probably would add another couple billion to Jho Low, maybe on the high end. It could be in the 3 billion range. It's very reasonably could be in that range. That's a very powerful person in the world. Not that many people control $3 billion, you know? And he somehow managed to become a master money launderer, despite having a very rocky start to the point where everyone could figure it out. So he's somebody with billions of dollars. He's living in the heart of Shanghai. He has a fake Australian passport that allows him to travel all over China and do whatever he wants and have some element of anonymity, and not be recognized or not leave a paper trail, so to speak. We've also said in our previous broadcasts about Where is Joe that he's used his wife as a cutout for himself as well. They've one other detail that we've learned is that they've even the anglicized version of the name, they've started saying Liu instead of Low, which is just a different pronunciation within I guess the dialects of Chinese. But there's a big process underway to kind of reinvent and rebuild and redefine who this family is. And I think it goes to the heart of Jho Low. He is so helpful when you need him to be. And so he's made himself, and it's amazing to see, become sort of indispensable to the Chinese government and to Chinese businesses who don't understand perhaps how the rest of the world works, how America works, how other countries work. And he's like a dark arts kind of coordinator for this country now. And I think that's just a fascinating discovery to have at this point. You know, you would just think this far along, this wouldn't be where we'd be. You know, if you would go back in time to where we were writing Billion Dollar Whale, we wouldn't guess that this is where we'd be.
Yeah, and then if we take it over to the Malaysian side, right? Like obviously Najib's in jail, so he's lost his protector on the Malaysian side. So then the question is, why isn't there a bigger move in Malaysia to get him, or to push China to get him back from the Anwar Ibrahim government? Partly it's just because Malaysia's a minnow power compared to China, and I'm sure they've made back channel push to get Jho Low sent back, and that they're just unable to move the needle. Anwar Ibrahim the Prime Minister of Malaysia, did say recently that I think he gave an interview to Al Jazeera where he said some quarters don't want him sent back, and he didn't refer to who those quarters were, and that was widely interpreted to mean China. But as Kyrie Jamaludin, the former minister under Najib, was saying earlier on our broadcast, Malaysia really does need to push much, much harder to get him sent back. Because if the end of this story is that Jho Low continues to live the life that you Bradley have just painted in China, that is such a terrible miscarriage of justice. For a lot of our listeners, whether they're in the US or Australia or wherever, or other parts of Asia, Europe, it's just an interesting story. And people who've read Billion Dollar Whale, people who've followed this issue over the years, they just want to know where Jho Low is. It's an interesting capstone to a really great narrative. But for the Malaysian people, it's much more important than that, right? It's about, and for those of you who've tuned in this evening, it's pretty late here, it's 11:15 p.m. on a Friday night. For those of you who've tuned in and listening now, it's because you do want to know, where is this guy who ripped off your country, one of your fellow countrymen, and then went on the lam and was never seen again? And sometimes with these white-collar crimes, it's very hard to, see the victims, but there's definitely victims here. There's schools not built, roads not built, infrastructure that didn't happen, development projects that didn't happen. And as Bradley said, we're talking about potentially double the amount that we ever thought was stolen in this fraud. Not 6 billion, but more like 12 billion or north of that. This is by far and away the largest fraud that's ever happened, and it's happened to a middle-income, poorer, not fully developed country. Meanwhile, Jho Low lives in those houses that we just showed you, which are among some of the most expensive houses in Beijing, and his family are enjoying ski vacations, and being members of the Hong Kong Yacht Club. By the way, his wife is a member of that, and that allows Jho Low to be a member without using his name. So that's where we're at, and we hope this isn't an end. Bradley and I can't let go of this, honestly, but we're as close as we've ever been to finding out where he is and what's going to happen to him.
I guess our questions for anyone listening is, what exactly is Jho Low up to? What are the different deals he's connected to? Where in the world? how is he using this fake Australian passport beyond what we already know? And, we just wanted to kind of just take a look at this, how Jho Low is the answer to how the world works today. It's people like him that are in between everything that's going on. And they're the ones that are having impacts on you that you didn't even realize. Even the average Malaysian person it was never disclosed to them how much money has gone missing. That's crazy. This should have been a public thing. Not only $7.65 billion stolen, but more damage that raised it to 12 billion, and then another 6 billion that is related to the Chinese deals that came as a direct result of trying to cover up the 1MDB scandal. That means the total size of this fraud, of the cost of the fraud, not the amount stolen, is about $18 billion. That is an incredible amount of money, and every Malaysian feels it without feeling it. They're affected by it without noticing, because you can't notice what it's like to not have a hospital built next to you because you never had it. And it's kind of like, if you have your credit card stolen and somebody maxes it out, it feels different than someone stealing your savings account. And that's what Malaysians are going through. And this is just a small example of what people are going through all over the world. Congo, Nigeria, wherever else there's these kind of kleptocratic things. You could even argue increasingly in the United States with some of the kind of family deals that are happening on a high level.
Well, I would say, in Malaysia's case, it's even more tragic because Malaysia is a success story. It has a semiconductor industry. It's got, decent infrastructure in many places. It's got a very well-educated and English-speaking population.
Yeah.
It's blessed with natural resources from palm oil to natural gas, and this scandal has held it back and set it back in ways that we're still just coming to terms with.
Yeah, and you're seeing on the screen right now something that we debuted yesterday. It's kind of a fun tool that is really made for anyone who wants to do this kind of investigation, because really this kind of investigation should be done on very small levels as well as high levels. So this is called Silent Partner. So if you go to the website silentpartners.app, it has pre-built relationship maps for 1MDB, BCCI, which is a famous historical case, and also the network of Jeffrey Epstein. And so we hope people could play around with this and work on it themselves, because I think this is the kind of relationships. This artist, Mark Lombardi, he talked about the silent partners. These are the people, these are the relationships between people that you don't get to see. And that's what we're seeing right now with Jho Low. He is the silent partner to all kinds of things that are happening. And it's pretty astounding and kind of scary how good he's gotten at this and how much of a kind of professional villain he's become. He went from the cuddly guy that they called Panda, whose favorite show was Kung Fu Panda, and it was almost kind of childish, to now master villain. So with that, we're going to say good night to everybody in Asia, and good afternoon to everybody in London, good morning to everybody in America, and thanks for joining our broadcast.